So there is this story that's been circulating about this nurse from Virginia who was arrested for breaking black babies' bones, y'all. According to the news articles, Erin Ann Strotman, 26, is charged with malicious wounding, child abuse, and neglect. Now, when I see things like this going on in the present, I can't help but to compare it to the past and see how things have been passed down through generations. I imagine Erin as a descendant of a people who fully enforced what was called the Caual Killing Act of 1669. Part of the Virginia slave codes, this law declared that should a slave be killed as a result of extreme punishment, the master shouldn't face any charges for the murder. So this law essentially made it legal for owners of enslaved people to kill them at will. Enacted on October 20th, 1669, the Caual Killing Act became part of what would become known as the Black Codes, or a group of laws which re-enslaved blacks essentially after the Civil War by restricting their rights. Now, Black Codes came from the slave codes and is the father of Jim Crow laws. Now, the reason the law was created in the first place was to protect white women because so many people were dying under her watch. It was to ensure that if a slave owner, let's say, beat a slave to death, they wouldn't be charged for it. Historians note that the people who were killing the most were white women, who were some of the greatest abusers, specifically of black children. There's a book called They Were Her Property, White Women as Slave Owners in the American South by Stephanie E. Jones Rogers. And in it, she breaks down how white women were some of the most horrific and diabolical slave masters, even more so than their own husbands. Even though women didn't have the same rights as men back then, white women could still circumvent this through anti-nuptial or marriage contracts that were similar to modern-day prenuptial agreements in ways that forbade their husbands from having control over their quote-unquote property. Jones Rogers notes that a separation of property was a provision that allowed a married woman to legally separate her property from that of her husband under certain circumstances. So on some plantations, you had a husband and wife who literally had their own slaves. So the husband, he was a slave owner, and then the wife was a slave owner, and the wife could do whatever she wanted to do to her slaves, even if her husband disagreed. And he couldn't take over her quote-unquote property. Fast forward to the 1930s, and Margaret Sanger, founder of the American Birth Control League and the Negro Project 1935, and an advocate for eugenics and forced sterilization, said, quote, "We don't want the word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population," end quote. She also said, quote, "The most merciful thing that the large family does to one of its infants is to kill it."